When Marvel's Spider-Man released back in 2018, everyone knew this was going to be amazing. It set up the new standard for what superhero games should be, similarly to how Arkham Asylum was for the genre as a whole. And a lot of comparisons were made between the two, with people calling it an Arkham-style Spider-Man game. And at its core, it kinda is. You know, you've got this big city to roam in, zipping across from building to building, collecting items, beating up thugs, and the likes. But most importantly, what held this acclaim was in its storytelling. Both of these games had taken familiar characters and wrote them in a way that made them feel more like real people. And all the same things could be said here about Spider-Man 2 in relation to Arkham City, where it builds off of the first one feeling quite familiar, as most sequels do, but also much grander and just overall much more large scale. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that Spider-Man 2 is like what God of War Ragnarok is to God of War. So not only is the map bigger, but so are the set pieces and the action, and the stakes are higher. Now just because it's bigger doesn't necessarily mean it's better. And I think it's an issue a lot of modern games have, where they're a mile wide and an inch deep, where they'll have content that stretches 70 plus hours, but really isn't that effective. That's why a lot of people are preferring shorter games, and Spider-Man 2 is a perfect length of around 20-ish hours. I've heard some people complain that it's still too long or it's too short, but honestly, I think it's the right length, and the price is completely justified, even if all the incredible games that released this year have been draining our wallets.
I'm ruined. I have nothing left except Spider-Man.
And with Spider-Man 2, I've gotta commend Insomniac for so many reasons, but mostly in how they were able to execute telling a story that featured both Peter and Miles, and both of their struggles and making these plotlines actually feel compelling and complete without losing its pacing or losing direction. It's not an easy thing to balance. They were able to take the first game and improve upon it in all the right ways, while crafting a story that remains true to the characters from the source material, while also leaving in some nice surprises. And what I mean by this is that they knew that surprising doesn't mean subverting, it means maintaining a certain level of mystery that breadcrumbs the audience with certain clues that leads to a satisfying conclusion. So even if you're able to predict certain things as the story progresses, you'll be left satisfied because of the natural build-up and flow. Beyond the story, there's of course the core gameplay loop, which they figured out in 2018, but given that it's gotten bigger within reason, they also figured out new mechanics to keep the flow going and to add something new. That is the addition of the spider wings, which now more than ever really makes you feel like Spider-Man. Of course, swinging is still present and very much still an option, but gliding with those wings allows you to traverse the world much faster than before, especially when using wind tunnels. I've heard some complaints about this one too, but honestly I really like this anyway. It allowed you to switch between swinging and gliding, making it more interesting. But since the map is pretty large, the game gives you the ability to fast travel like in the first one once you've opened it up in that particular region. But unlike the first one, you can travel anywhere in that region instead of it being designated to one fast travel point. But here's the best part. You see how quick and instantaneous that was? In the first one you'd have to wait and there would be a train loading screen, but here it's immediate. And it's the same thing for when you want to switch between Peter and Miles. There's no load times. And now some may say that it's hidden behind holding down the square button, but Insomniac confirmed that it's simply to avoid accidentally switching when you don't mean to. But even if that were the case, this is still insanely fast and another impressive feat for them. I say another because Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart to this day is still one of the most impressive and visually stunning games I've ever played, and that feeling carries on here in Spider-Man 2. I don't normally score games because it can be hard sometimes, but I do think that if I had to, I might give it either a 9 or a 9.5. Dare I say a 10? Because while it's not in my top 5 games of all time, or even top 10, there is nothing more I could ask for in a Spider-Man game. And though it isn't one of my favorites of all time, it's definitely a Game of the Year contender for sure. Almost right up there with Tears of the Kingdom and Baldur's Gate 3. I've also heard some points of criticism in regards to the villain of the story, Kraven. But I actually like Kraven. I enjoyed every time he appeared on screen. Was he the most fleshed out character, or did he have the most complex backstory? No, he didn't. And he didn't have to. Because while characters, especially villains, are really well done when you give them more dimension, not every character needs it. Sometimes the villain's motivation can really be just that simple. Besides, the story isn't so much about him, but rather how he serves as the anchor that plays on Peter and his friends and his internal conflict within himself and Venom. He is there to build all the other characters rather than be fleshed out himself, and that's okay. Now I could get more into that, but since I fear I may be entering spoiler territory, I'll move on. But also, the story pacing was also done really well, To break up some of the monotony that may come from the swinging, the gliding, and the punching bad guys after a while, they also mix up some of the gameplay elements here and there, breaking up the story into sections that feel more memorable. Insomniac took a page directly out of Naughty Dog's playbook here by adding in scenes that were more grounded and character-oriented. There's a scene on Coney Island that feels reminiscent of the mall section in the Last of Us Left Behind DLC, where it's all fun and games and you get to try out different activities, and it just feels like genuine friends having fun. There's another section that builds on the relationship between Peter and Harry that again feels a lot like a Naughty Dog one. Here, it explores the friendship as they reminisce about their high school days, showing flashbacks of what they were like versus who they've now become. And what helps carry a lot of this emotional weight and connection, and the dynamics between Peter and Harry, or Peter and Miles, or Peter and MJ too, is of course in their performances. That is something that is present in both of the previous games, and that carries on through here, especially Yuri Lowenthal in his Billy Maguire era. But nothing will ever top
Shocker! You can't escape me! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!
Unfortunately, this doesn't make it into the game. Instant 0 out of 10. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. Another thing to add to all of this is that there are quite a few points where you play as MJ again. I know this is one of those parts that people hated in the first game, but I found it to be actually quite cool, at least this time around. Again, it was just another way to break up the story, and I think it builds somewhat more of an emotional connection when actually playing as the character, so you'll be able to understand her struggle better as well. The combat here is of course similar to the other two games, both 2018 and Miles Morales, but the varying powers you can unlock in the skill trees shake things up a little. This is because you're not just sharing one skill tree for both Spider-Men? Spider-Mans?
Spider-Men? Spider-Mans?
That's confusing.
But also, they've each got their own, which slightly changes up the gameplay style a bit, and how different they feel in their own right. The enemy types again are similar to the previous ones, but correct me if I'm wrong, I don't recall there being a parry attack, it was just dodge. Now of course you still can dodge, but there are certain enemies that you can't, and you must parry. This makes it a bit more interesting and a tad bit more challenging in my opinion, because if you miss that hit, it can quite significantly lower your health quicker than you may expect. Aside from the skill trees for the duo, there are also suit tech, which you can upgrade for your health, your damage, your focus, and your traversal. I really spent most of my points in health and damage, but I would recommend dumping some in traversal earlier on, so it's easier to traverse in certain missions. There are also gadgets, which I think are pretty self-explanatory, though I honestly barely invested in them as much. And there's also the abilities tab, which is where you can equip and swap out the different abilities you've gained. So yeah, there's a lot more to manage, and it can seem kind of overwhelming to newer players, but it is something that you get used to pretty quickly. Oh, and also, now you've got tons of various options for suits to equip as well. Not only do you unlock different suits, but you can unlock various styles that switch up some of the color combinations, which can really reflect your own personal style. Now onto the technical stuff I do feel like I have to mention. In my time playing, I did encounter a couple of crashes, clipping through a building, no audio for certain objects in one scene, a character model in a cutscene clipping through their suit, button prompt not responding, and the infamous cube suit that everyone's seemingly been getting. These were fixed with a quick reload, though it does break immersion a bit. But at the same time, it's really minor, especially when compared to all the bugs we see in other modern games these days, and I'd imagine it will get patched soon enough. But also, I have to say, given how this generally runs, I'm surprised that there aren't many more. What's more surprising here though are the different graphical modes. Of course you've got your standard fidelity that prioritizes resolution and graphics over frame rate, and performance mode that prioritizes frame rate over resolution. Now most of the time, for most games I will always opt for performance mode, as I, and probably most of you out there, care about frame rate more. Having to sacrifice some of the textures and the ray tracing is usually a good enough trade-off, because playing in the stable 60 FPS or higher is essential in the actual gameplay. But here it's a weird one, because I actually ended up playing on fidelity this time, and while I may not be a frame rate junkie, I can still normally tell a difference between 60 and 30 when I'm playing. But here, and I'm not sure if it's only this game or if I'm the only crazy one, I didn't notice I was even playing in this mode for about half the game. And that was only because I noticed the ray tracing. Now on performance this time, apparently there is ray tracing there too, but it's not as detailed. But I checked the settings, and sure enough, I was playing on this mode. And to note, I didn't even use a 120Hz display that adds to the smoothing, though there is a smoothing option you can toggle as well. However, even after toggling on and off, I don't think I noticed a difference. Anyway, I was super impressed with how it looked, and no matter what settings you're playing on, you'll likely really enjoy it. But if you want a full performance review, I'll link the Digital Foundry video below. All in all, Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is a triumph that not only meets but exceeds the high expectations set by its predecessor. It's a must-play for fans of the web-slinger and a shining example of how superhero games should be crafted. With its compelling story, refined gameplay, and technical prowess, it is a love letter to Spider-Man fans. Marvel Spider-Man may have been amazing, but Marvel Spider-Man 2 was spectacular.
This is something else.
Thanks for watching as always. If you enjoyed this video, leave a thumbs up and subscribe for more reviews like this. Anyway, thanks for swinging by and sticking around, and I'll see you soon.